Hello everyone, Hemant here. Now we are going to listen to podcast news which includes important editorials. While walking in the morning or evening, while cooking, cycling or during free time you can listen. It will enhance your learning and understanding of various accents and pronunciations. Listening improves the quality of communication and comprehension. Before going ahead, I would like to welcome you all to the virtual school. A new way of learning and teaching, with the vision of Let's Grow Together. Our mission is to learn how to learn and teach how to teach. So stay tuned. And here we go. Editorial 1. Virulence and variance policymakers have little option but to renew economic activities after rapid vaccination. The IMF's latest update to its World Economic Outlook spotlights the starkly widening variance in the global recovery from the economic strains caused by the pandemic. And the primary fault line precipitating the divergence of the world's economies into two blocks: those that are normalizing activities from the COVID-19 induced curbs and those that are still struggling is vaccine access and the pace of vaccination coverage. 3 months since its April forecast, the IMF projects the global economy to expand at an unchanged pace of 6% this year. But it sees the world's advanced economies registering faster growth than forecast earlier, while emerging markets and developing economies are expected to post appreciably slower recoveries. The IMF projects advanced economies to grow by 5.6% in 2021, 0.5 percentage point quicker than forecast in April. Undergirding this anticipated acceleration, the U.S. economy is seen expanding by 7%, a 0.6 percentage point upgrade on the back of an expansive vaccine rollout that has helped enable substantial normalization in activity, and expectations of additional fiscal support. Emerging market and developing economies on the other hand are seen expanding by 6.3%, 0.4 percentage points lower than projected in April. India is seen as the largest drag, with the fund cutting its growth forecast for South Asia's largest economy by 3 percentage points to 9.5%. Citing the impact of the severe second wave and expected slow recovery in confidence as a reason for its downgrade, the IMF has warned that countries lagging in vaccination, such as India and Indonesia, would suffer the most among G20 economies in the event of the emergence of a super-contagious virus variant. With just a little over 7% of the population fully vaccinated, India significantly lags the estimated global average of almost 14%, Brazil's 18%, and is way behind the 50% and 55% coverage achieved in the US and the UK, respectively. The fund was effusive in its praise for India's decisive action in January, when it forecast 11.5% growth for the fiscal year ending in March 2022, before raising that projection to 12.5% in April, after the economy appeared to rebound well in the January-March quarter. That it has now downgraded its outlook so substantially reflects the extent to which the second wave has severely impaired momentum. With inflation looming as a visceral threat, demand yet to regain traction and political appetite in government for more fiscal support negligible, India's policymakers have little option but to hasten the vaccine rollout on a war footing. Failure to expedite the coverage could cost the country dearly. Thank you. Editorial 2. Probing PegasusWest Bengal government is right in ordering a judicial inquiry into the spyware scandal. The institution of a judicial probe by the West Bengal government into allegations of surveillance using advanced spyware on potential Indian targets marks a significant political and legal pushback against the union government's attempts to deny the global media revelations and diminish the potent threat such practices pose to democracy. Given Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee's penchant for the dramatic and her endless run-ins with the centre, it may be easy to dismiss the act of a state government ordering an inquiry into what could be a large-scale intelligence-gathering program of a state actor as mere political chutzpah. However, in the context of the centre and the ruling BJP's aggressive refusal to cede any ground on the growing demand for a credible probe into the use and misuse of Pegasus spyware, the West Bengal inquiry acquires both legal and political salience. The union government claims that illegal surveillance is not possible in India and has not specifically admitted or denied the use of Pegasus, the spyware supplied by Israel's NSO group. Ms. Banerjee has rightly invoked the possible grave implications for democracy, public order, the independence of the judiciary and the autonomy of legislators while ordering an inquiry under the Commissions of Inquiry Act. Media reports suggest that those likely targeted included Prashant Kishore, the Trinamool Congress's strategist during the recent assembly polls, and Abhishek Banerjee, Ms. Banerjee's nephew. Regardless of which agency or government was behind it, there are grounds to believe that part of the surveillance covered the state government's territory, bringing into play its legitimate right to order an investigation. It is entirely a different matter that the two-member commission, comprising Justice Madan B. Lokar, former judge of the Supreme Court, and Justice Jyotirmay Bhattacharya, former Chief Justice of the Calcutta High Court, may face severe constraints. For one thing, only some of the potential targets may testify and seek the Commission's aid in getting their phones forensically examined for evidence of infection by Pegasus. Central agencies may not readily offer their cooperation. The Intelligence Bureau may not be permitted to join the probe, and even if it did, it may claim privilege over documents and records relating to its legitimate interception orders, citing national security and operational sensitivity. In a country where there is no parliamentary oversight over its intelligence agencies, it is unclear how far these agencies and its personnel would cooperate with a probe ordered by a state government. There have been instances, the Jain and Verma commissions come to mind, of intelligence files being made available to judicial panels. Therefore, it will be both desirable and appropriate if the center itself ordered a wide-ranging judicial inquiry into the Pegasus scandal so that the nation has an opportunity to get at the truth. Thank you. Editorial 3. A judgment that must be taken in the right spirit. The striking down of the 97th Amendment is a reminder that the power to regulate cooperatives must stay with states. Vikram Hegde. Getty Images. A constitutional amendment is a rare event. There have only been 104 such cases of those in the 71 years since the Constitution came into being. Rarer still is when a court strikes down a constitutional amendment, an event which has occurred only 7 times before last week. But such a moment has come to pass once again as Union of India vs Rajendra and Shah, a judgment delivered by the Supreme Court of India on July 20, 2021. The 97th constitutional amendment was struck down, albeit in a limited manner. The background. The 97th constitutional amendment came into effect from February 15, 2012, https://bit.ly/3xa0mo, and brought about many changes to the legal regime of cooperative societies. The amendment added cooperative societies to the protected forms of association under Article 19(1)(c), elevating it to a fundamental right. It also inserted Part IXB in the Constitution, which laid down the terms by which cooperative societies would be governed, in more granular detail than was palatable. The Constitution can be amended only by the procedure provided in Article 368. The amendment procedure requires a majority of the total strength of each of the Houses of Parliament and 2/3 majority of those present and voting. A proviso to the article lists out some articles and chapters of the Constitution, which can be amended only by a special procedure. The special procedure requires that the amendment will also have to be ratified by the legislatures of half of the states. It is precisely on the grounds of violation of this additional requirement that the 97th constitutional amendment was challenged. It is important to locate this amendment in context. The idea that the cooperative sector ought to be controlled at the state level and not at the central or union level goes back all the way to the Government of India Act, 1919, which placed cooperatives in the provincial list. This scheme carried forward into the Constitution with entry 32 of the state list in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, conferring power on the state legislatures to make laws pertaining to incorporation, regulation, and the winding up of cooperative societies. Central control. But the Union government has been acquiring incrementally greater control of cooperative societies over the years. Cooperative banks have been brought under the purview of the Reserve Bank of India. The political intent of the Union government for more active involvement in the cooperative sector is also apparent from the recently established Union Ministry for Cooperation. The Statement of Objects and Reasons of the Amendment Bill, which resulted in the amendment in question, cites the need for greater independence and transparency in the functioning of the cooperatives and inserted a number of provisions which provided for the regulation of cooperative societies. The Gujarat High Court struck down the amendment in 2013 on the grounds that it had failed to comply with the requirements under Article 368(2), by virtue of not having been ratified by the states, and had also given an additional finding that the 97th Amendment violated the basic structure of the Constitution. The Union government challenged the Gujarat High Court judgment before the Supreme Court, arguing that the amendment neither directly nor effectively changed the scheme of distribution of powers between the center and the states. The parties which had challenged the amendment in the High Court argued that Part IXB, inserted by the 97th Amendment, impinged upon the legislative power of the states by casting mandatory obligations upon the state legislatures to legislate in a particular way in areas in which they ought to have had freedom. Some clauses of the newly inserted part of the Constitution would also override some existing state legislations. The court took the example of the 73rd and 74th Amendments, which introduced the chapters on panchayats and municipalities, respectively. Those amendments, similar in impact on the legislative power of the states, had been passed by the special procedure involving ratification by state legislatures. The court noted that the procedure had not been followed in this case, but clarified that the judgment is confined to the procedural lacuna and does not go into the question of the amendment being violative of the basic structure of the Constitution. Making a distinction. Having found this lapse in procedure, the judgment makes a distinction between cooperative societies operating in one state and multi-state cooperative societies, and holds that while a ratification by half the state legislatures would have been necessary insofar as it applies to cooperative societies in one state, they chose not to go deeper into the question of whether the amendment also required ratification in respect of application to multi-state cooperative societies. The minority opinion considered that the provisions of the newly added part which pertain to multi-state cooperative societies could not exist independently of the parts which pertain to cooperative societies, and hence the whole amendment should be struck down. This now brings us to the question, can the government get over this decision? In theory it would seem simple enough. The amendment has only been struck down on account of the right procedure not having been followed, and another amendment can be brought, but this time, going through the rigor of ratification by state legislatures. The National Democratic Alliance has a majority in 18 out of 28 state legislatures. The amendment which has now been struck down was an amendment of the United Progressive Alliance era, so it is not clear as to whether there will be any significant political opposition to the amendment if it is brought again. A sector best left alone. Which brings us to the next question, should they? The cooperative sector has always been in the domain of the states or provinces. The organizing principles and mechanism of these cooperatives differ from area to area and depend on the industry or crop which forms the fulcrum of the cooperative. Homogeneity in this area would only result in the creation of round holes in which square pegs no longer fit. They also would not really serve to break the control some political interests have taken over cooperatives. It is best that the government takes this judgment in the right spirit and stays away from further meddling in the cooperative sector, notwithstanding the creation of the new ministry. Vikram Hegde is an advocate on record in the Supreme Court of India. Thank you. Editorial 4. Japanese education spells holistic development. It begins from scratch with elementary schools playing a vital role in trying to create mindful and responsible citizens. Getty Images. Investment in education yields both private and social returns. Private returns, like wages, accrue to individuals. Social returns accrue to society. Textbook economics suggests that private returns rise with one's level of education, but social returns peak at the elementary levels. For when educated people follow rules such as queuing, using washrooms, washing hands, protecting public property, etc., the collective returns from such actions generate a huge social value such as cleaner, healthier, and disciplined societies. Education is everything that expands our capabilities as individuals and as society. The novel coronavirus pandemic has given us an opportunity to re-evaluate how our schools should expand our capabilities. While academic prowess in math, science, and language is essential, what about the issue of household chores? Or connecting with the community or nature? Does learning household chores expand one's capabilities? For if people do not know how to keep their spaces clean, cook their own food, do their laundry, it just needs a shock like a COVID-19 pandemic to occur and for a society dependent on the labor of others to feel incredibly disrupted. Add to it shortages of essential supplies and overstretched public resources, and social disruption is inevitable. So, how can we prepare for the future? The answer, through our elementary schools. Can we learn from another country? Yes. Probably, Japan. In 2011, Pictures from tsunami hit Japan went viral, with locals patiently queuing up for rations amidst massive devastation. Throughout the novel coronavirus pandemic, schools and public spaces have remained fairly open in Japan due to people's responsible behavior. As India prepares to reopen its schools along with the newly adopted new education policy, we can borrow some insights from the Japanese system. Non-cognitive elements. Japan ranks among the top in the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, which evaluates students on their prowess in core academic subjects. However, another important aspect of the Japanese curriculum is its emphasis on non-cognitive elements. Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, MEXT, explains chi tokutai as the defining features of Japanese schooling. Chi, which translates to know, lay an emphasis on building strong academic abilities. Toku, translates to virtue and refers to mindfulness, self-discipline, and cooperative abilities. And last, Tai, translates to body, and refers to physical and mental well-being. The Japanese education philosophy transitioned from an extremely examination-focused, rote memorization-based approach to the chi tokutai approach in the 1970s. The elementary school curriculum was later supplemented with subjects, namely moral education, integrated studies, and special activities. Together, seen as a zest for life approach, this philosophy focuses on holistic ability extending beyond academic prowess to include kansei, which roughly translates to sensitivity. This approach aims at developing a knowledgeable mind which can appreciate beauty and nature, hold a sense of justice, and respect life and labor. Shaping social behavior. Moral education includes norms that define socially responsible and considerate behavior towards everyone, including nature. For example, as a summer project, students venture out in nature observing beetles, cicadas, crickets, and sketching or noting their characteristics in their insect diary. Students as young as first graders take turns to clean their classrooms, washrooms, serve school lunches, and water the plants at school. When students cross a pedestrian crossing while making a driver wait, they bow in a thank you to express gratitude. While these are some examples, the essence is that elementary school curriculum can play a tremendous role in building courteous and mindful societies. Such a system reaps several benefits. As students do various chores, it builds respect for labor and humility at a young age. It trains them to undertake routine jobs in an efficient manner and encourages responsible and mindful behavior towards the community. Think of how the Japanese fans celebrated their victory in the 2018 Football World Cup opening match against Colombia by cleaning up their rows in the stadium in Russia. Finding solutions. Integrated studies encompasses experiential learning and independent thinking where students identify problems in their local communities and think of solutions. For example, children may create a disaster preparedness map based on their own research. Seniors from the community are invited to share insights about the community's history. Activities such as these integrate schools with the community. If we can train our children in identifying problems in their local communities such as health ailments, pollution, waste disposal, etc., and coach them in developing solution roadmaps, the gains to both sides can be immense. The Special Activities Hour encourages students to consider the school as a society. These include activities such as organizing events, maintaining the library, etc. After task completion, students are made to reflect on the problems they experienced in the process such as wastage, conflict, etc., and the ways to resolve them. This inculcates the practice of Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement. Finally, another notable aspect that defines Japanese society and education system is collectivism. Unlike the West, Japan is a collectivist society. Working as a group and group harmony is fundamental to the society. While this has its own limitations, the general belief that one wins only when the group wins, generates equitable and united societies. It's about unity. For us, volunteering for a treasure hunt activity involving third graders in Tokyo gave us an interesting insight into collectivism. Teams had to find the hidden treasure, however, the primary target was not the treasure but to keep the unit together. Teams could only move forward when all its members were together and agreed on the next strategy. So, if there were students on wheelchairs or slow otherwise, the group respectfully waited for them to arrive. Finally, the teachers had to pick one student per group to go to the stage to display the treasure and receive the audience's applause. Surprisingly, they picked the ones who were usually lagging. Every third grader felt included and valued. The real treasure had been found. Amazing, isn't it? Prachi Gupta is an adjunct professor of economics and political science at Temple University, Japan campus, Tokyo. Prajaktakara is an associate professor of economics at Meiji-Gakuin University, Tokyo. Thank you. Editorial 5. No need for a drastic population policy. Data from Assam and Uttar Pradesh show that fertility rates have been reducing over time. Population policy is suddenly in the news in India, with Bharatiya Janata Party-ruled states such as Assam and Uttar Pradesh proposing to bring in or bringing in draft legislation aimed at controlling their populations. The Uttar Pradesh Population, Control, Stabilization, and Welfare Bill of 2021 promotes a two-child policy, according to which those people having more than 2 children will be barred from contesting local body elections and become ineligible to apply for state government jobs. A similar law has also been proposed in Assam, where the Chief Minister has even announced a population army to curb the birth rate in Muslim-dominated areas in Lower Assam. The UP Chief Minister has said that the aim of the policy is to reduce the total fertility rate in his state. The Chief Ministers of these states don't seem to have read the document on population projection, published by the Union Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in 2019. According to this document, UP will reach a replacement rate, the rate at which women give birth to enough babies to sustain population levels, of 2.1 by 2025, and Assam by 2020. If the replacement fertility rate has already been achieved in Assam and will be achieved by 2025 in UP, what is the need for any drastic population policy? Decreasing fertility rates. The need arises because population policy is an important weapon in the arsenal of the Hindutva Brigade to attack the Muslim population in the country. The Assam Chief Minister's population army in Muslim areas and the UP Chief Minister's many utterances prove this. However, even on this score, their policy framework is wrong. According to the National Family Health Survey, NFHS-2 data, the total fertility rate, TFR, which is the average number of children that women of reproductive age group have had in their lifetime, in 1998 to 99 in UP was 3.87 for Hindus and 4.76 for Muslims. In 2015 to 16, it decreased to 2.67 for Hindus and 3.1 for Muslims. This means that the TFR declined by 1.2 for Hindus and by 1.66 for Muslims, which is higher. The NFHS-5 data for 2019 to 20 for UP have not been published. When it is published, data will show that the fertility rate for both Hindus and Muslims has declined even further. The fertility trend for Assam is even starker. According to NFHS data, Assam had a TFR of 3.5 in 1992 to 93, which decreased to 1.9 in 2019 to 20. Even after such a drastic decline in TFR, the Chief Minister's enthusiasm to decrease it even further has no merit other than scoring political points based on a distorted notion of religious demography. In 1998 to 99, the TFR for Hindus in Assam was 2.0, which declined to 1.59 in 2019 to 20. For Muslims, it declined from 3.05 to 2.38 in the same period. While the fertility rate of Hindus is less than the replacement level, the fertility rate of Muslims is near that level and will reach there in the near future without any policy intervention. The point is that fertility rate does not depend on religion. It depends on socio-economic characteristics like education, income, maternal and child health conditions, and other associated factors. The graphs above show this in a concise manner. We have taken the district-wise fertility rates for Hindus and Muslims in 4 states, UP, Assam, West Bengal, and Bihar, calculated from NFHS for 2015 to 16 data. The horizontal axis shows the fertility rate for Hindus and the vertical axis shows the fertility rate for Muslims. It is clear from the graphs that there is a positive relationship between the fertility rates of Hindus and Muslims. In other words, in districts where Hindus have a high fertility rate, the fertility rate of Muslims is also high. This cannot be explained by religion but by socio-economic factors in these districts. It is also clear that there are districts in these 4 states where the fertility rate for Hindus is actually higher than that of Muslims. The fertility rate of Hindus is greater than Muslims in 4 districts of Assam, 11 districts of Bihar, 22 of UP and 3 of West Bengal. Therefore, to stigmatize Muslims in terms of population growth and breeding more children is a figment of the right-wing imagination and not supported by facts. Preference for a male child. The preceding discussion pointed out that the population control policy of imposing a 2-child norm is not supported by data. However, it can have other unintended consequences. Generally, any discussion on fertility focuses on policy recommendations regarding increasing female education, which is no doubt important. However, a single-minded focus on this policy instrument ignores the issue of a preference for male children, which is dominant in the country. An earlier study of women's fertility in Hindi heartland states showed that the proportion of graduate women who had 2 living daughters but still wanted another child was 23.7% in Bihar, 27.3% in UP and 28.3% in Rajasthan. This is nothing but an indicator of a preference for sons in a patriarchal and caste-dominated society. Given such a preference for male children, the 2-child norm will only increase sex-selective abortions of girl children, and female infanticide, since couples will want to maintain both the 2-child norm as proposed to be enacted by the government as well as their preference for sons. Problem of aging. The experience of China also shows that if the state imposes its decision on families' fertility choices, such a decision is bound to fail. With the 1-child policy, the proportion of the aged population is increasing in China. Fewer younger workers are available, which might result in a slowdown of economic growth. As a result, the government has been forced to relax the 1-child policy and adopt a 3-child policy. In India too, as per the population projection report, the proportion of people aged 60 years and above will increase from 13.8% in 2011 to 23.1% in 2036. The 2-child norm will only further aggravate the problem of aging. The lesson to be drawn is that the decision on children is best made by the family, which can be nudged towards making choices that ensure a stable population growth. As a famous demographer argued, the fertility behavior of a couple is a calculus of conscious choice. India's decades-old population policy has achieved replacement-level fertility in the country without taking any coercive measures. Governments should have faith in these time-tested policies and respect the choices of people rather than impose warped and motivated ideas regarding demography on the people. Subhanal Chowdhury and Susvata Ghosh are faculty at the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. Thank you. Editorial 6. Spotlight on the triangle with the pandemic fueling nationalism in politics in the US, China, and India. Relations are in a difficult phase. Open embrace. India-US ties in a divided world. Varghese K. George. Penguin Random House. 399 Indian rupees. Varghese K. George. The COVID-19 pandemic has sharpened divisions within and among countries. Nationalism continues to stir India, with the re-election of Narendra Modi in 2019, and the US, despite the defeat of Donald Trump in 2020. The pandemic and the expansionism of China have led India and the US to put their relationship in the spotlight, writes the author in a revised edition of Open Embrace, India-US Ties in a Divided World. An excerpt. While the pandemic turned out to be yet another occasion for China to claim superiority of its economic and political model, it also exposed the weaknesses of the American political and economic system. COVID-19 triggered a fresh round of debate on liberalism. As for India, 2020 was a year of reckoning in its relations with China. In a first in 45 years, both sides lost soldiers in a border clash. At least 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown number of Chinese died in Ladakh in June 2020, leading to massive mobilization of forces by both sides. The Chinese factor. The aftermath of the pandemic fueled more nationalism in politics in many parts of the world, certainly in China, India, and the US. Even in his defeat, Donald Trump so sharply put the spotlight on China as the key challenger of the US in the 21st century that Joe Biden and the Democrats have agreed to broadly follow that line. The Chinese action of occupying disputed territories so damaged the bilateral relationship that it is now at its most difficult phase in the last 34 years, according to S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister. The Chinese action remained inexplicable. China gave India 5 differing explanations and literally brought tens of thousands of soldiers in full military preparation mode right to the Lak in Ladakh. Ashley Tellis has linked the Chinese action to India's decision in August 2019 to carve out Ladakh as a federally administered territory, along with the ending of the special constitutional status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In the last 7 decades of America's strategy in South Asia, there has been one constant, and that is Pakistan and its military as a partner in propping up jihadis, then fighting them and now being found out as playing both sides. Also noteworthy is the fact that the U.S.'s entanglement with Pakistan and China is inseparable from one another. Pakistan had aided U.S. China ties in the 1970s, and today, Pakistan does not fight shy of its loyalty and admiration for China. In January 2021, Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan said the Chinese model of development was something that his country would want to emulate. I think Pakistan is going to help us out to extricate ourselves from Afghanistan, Trump said in July 2019. In January 2018, he had said, "They have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools." Trump's contradictory, strident remarks are unusual for a president, but these are instructive. General Lloyd Austin, appointed defense secretary by Biden, said during his confirmation hearing that Pakistan had taken constructive steps in the Afghanistan peace process. For all the strategic clarity that the U.S. is supposed to possess, it cannot decide for sure whether Pakistan is an ally or an enemy. Much in the same manner as ties with China, the U.S. relationship with Pakistan remains an unsettled question. Pakistan's constant refrain has been that the route to peace in Afghanistan is through Kashmir, the argument being that unless America forces India to make concessions in Kashmir, no progress was possible in Afghanistan, making both Kashmir and Afghanistan part of the same continuum of transnational Islamist politics. American presidents until Barack Obama were sympathetic to this position, though nobody stated it in obvious terms. India's resistance to the American view of seeing Kashmir and Afghanistan as components of the same puzzle predates Modi's Hindutva doctrine. While opposing any link between Kashmir and Afghanistan, the prime ministers before Modi were willing to separately engage with Kashmiri separatists and Pakistan on the issue. Since 2014, the country's position has become more strident and combative. The BJP and the PDP had a common minimum program that left negotiations with the separatists solely with the PDP and in Srinagar, and the central government showed little interest in addressing insurgency in the state other than by military force. In late 2017, the Modi government appointed Dineshwar Sharma as interlocutor for Kashmir, whose failure was foretold. In June 2018, the BJP ended its alliance with the PDP, and in August 2019, the special constitutional status of Jammu and Kashmir was rescinded. While Pakistan has been pleading with America to be more interventionist in Kashmir, India has resisted all such moves. Excerpted with permission from Penguin Random House India. Thank you. Editorial 7. Oxygen for fiscal federalism. A special rate could be levied to the states to enable them to raise more resources during the pandemic. Rajmohan Unithan. James Madison, who created the basic framework for the U.S. Constitution, once said, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." But Indian federalism is very different. The British lawyer and academic, Sir Ivor Jennings, was of the view that India has a federation with a strong centralising policy. Nonetheless, India maintained its limited federal characteristics for a fairly long time. Those characteristics are now disappearing in the Modi era. Disregarding an obligation. At the time of introducing the new indirect tax regime, the Goods and Services Tax, GST, law assured states a 14% increase in their annual revenue for 5 years, up to July 1, 2020. But the Union government has deviated from the statutory promise and has been insisting that states avail themselves of loans. Kerala is entitled to a GST compensation of 4,041 Indian rupees crore for the financial year 2020 to 21. But the union government has been disregarding this obligation. The future interest liability of these loans should not be placed on the shoulders of the states. Moreover, the borrowing limit of states, as per the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, should not be built into these loans. This policy needs clarity. Last year, the union government increased the borrowing ceiling of the states from 3% to 5% for FY 2020 to 21. But conditions are attached to 1.5% of the 2% of increased ceiling. It is the states which have to bear the burden of welfare and relief measures during the pandemic. Attaching conditions for expenditure out of the borrowed amount would clip the wings of the states and goes against the principle of cooperative federalism. The 15th Finance Commission had recommended 2,412 Indian rupees crore as a sector-specific grant and 1,100 Indian rupees crore as a state-specific grant for Kerala. But the union government has not taken any steps to release these amounts. The expenditure rules attached to the Disaster Management Fund are unviable. The rules could be amended to ease expenditure. The Corporate Social Responsibility Fund could be remitted to the Chief Minister's Relief Fund. As per the Constitution, 101st Amendment, Act, compensation on account of the implementation of GST will be available for a period of 5 years. Compensation beyond 5 years requires a constitutional amendment. The GST Act says it is a law to provide for compensation to the states for the loss of revenue arising on account of the implementation of the GST for a period of 5 years or for such period as may be prescribed on the recommendation of the GST Council. Urgent measures. The present compensation period will end in 2021 to 22. Beyond this period, it is going to be very difficult to convince the union government to provide compensation as there is no constitutional obligation to do so to the states. This will create serious financial stress to the states, especially to those which require higher compensation. As per Section 4(f) of Article 279A, the union government can consider introducing any special rate to raise additional resources during the pandemic, any natural calamity or disaster. Section 4(f) says, the Goods and Services Tax Council shall make recommendations to the union and the states on any special rate or rates for a specified period, to raise additional resources during any natural calamity or disaster. Article 279A was inserted through the Constitution, 101st Amendment, Act. Hence, a special rate could be levied for a specified period in order to raise additional resources to meet the challenges posed by COVID-19 with the approval of the GST Council. These are some urgent necessary measures that are to be taken for pumping oxygen to fiscal federalism in India. Raj Mohan Uni then is Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha, from Kasaragod. Thank you. 50 years ago, July 29, 1971, we won't fall into trap, Swaran Singh. The External Affairs Minister, Mr. Swaran Singh, today warned that any attempt by any party or country to twist the Bangladesh problem into an Indo-Pakistani issue will be strongly resisted by India. We will not fall into this trap, he said, while replying to questions in the Rajya Sabha today, New Delhi, July 28. India had made its position very clear to the UN Secretary-General, UNT, as well as to the ambassadors representing the member countries of the Security Council and several other important members. I feel that our position is understood by these countries, he said. Mr. Swaran Singh told the House that the UN Secretary-General had not suggested the convening of a meeting of the Secretary Council formally or informally to consider the Bangladesh situation. He also denied that the Secretary-General had tried to equate India and Pakistan on the issue. Any such equation is opposed to facts and we have rejected it totally, he added. What was needed now, he said, was that attention should be diverted and concentrated in creating conditions in Bangladesh which should stop the refugees from coming to India and enable those who were in India to go back in safety and security. He said the government of India had also made its position very clear that any suggestion to post additional UN observers in India and Pakistan was an entirely wrong approach to the problem. 100 years ago, July 29, 1921, German missionaries. The Secretary of the World Alliance for Promoting International Friendship through the Churches recently wrote to the colonial, Indian and foreign offices suggesting that German missionaries should be allowed to resume their work in certain British